Good morning, everyone. I hope you had a great weekend. You have joined the SEC in 60. It's our weekly show on SEC football. That's all it is, SEC football. Nothing else makes the show except the Southeastern Conference football for 60 minutes, and we go at least 60 minutes. This is our 7th week. Chad Niepling of SEC Sports Insider and myself, Mark Rogers of MarkRogersTV, firing this thing up, and we bring on our regular guest here. He's become more than a guest. He's become a regular here on the show because we love the insight, the analysis from Stephen M. Smith of Touchdown Alabama. You can catch him on Twitter at ESPN_the future. Is that correct? ESPN_future. That's where you find Stephen M. Smith of Touchdown Alabama, currently working, and he's released an article going back to 1992, a very historic year in SEC football when Roy Kramer was able to get enough backing to put a conference championship game in play, and that has completely changed the landscape of college football and the quest for a national championship and the money structure in college football, and really separated the SEC in later years from the rest of the conferences. So again, I'm Mark Rogers of MarkRogersTV, and this is the SEC in 60 every Monday, live on Google Hangouts, 1 o'clock Eastern, noon Central. We talk SEC football. Today we're going to talk scheduling. We're going to give you our top 5 SEC quarterbacks heading into 2014, and we're going to talk some Kentucky spring football, and we're going to start our run of looking at each team's schedules, because if you go 14 teams, one a week, that almost gets us to the opener of 2014. Stephen M., thanks so much for joining us today. We appreciate you jumping on board.
Mark, it's amazing being here on the show this week. It's been an incredible week for me. I'm actually coming off a little bit of the celebration high of my folks celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary this week. So coming off the wedding anniversary high.
Well, that is awesome. Congratulations to them. That is amazing. 30 years, that's definitely a testament to their relationship there. That's awesome. So let's talk some SEC football. I know we addressed this a couple weeks ago. The ACC, however, in the last week has decided, like the SEC, to stick with the 8-game schedule. There was a push in the ACC, like the SEC, and most notably Nick Saban, to go to 9 games. I know we discussed it a few weeks ago. We wanted to get Chad's comments. Unfortunately, Chad not with us today. Stephen M., your thoughts about the SEC schedule, because I think you know that I've got some serious concerns about the schedule, to put it lightly.
Well, Mark, though Nick Saban wanted the 9 games, me personally, I kind of wanted the 9th game for tough competition reasons, for revenue reasons. But when you look at having the 8-game schedule, it's not bad in the sense of each team has to play another team from the Power 5 conference. You have to play a team from the ACC. You have to play a team from the Big Ten, the Pac-12, the Big 12, what have you. And I think that playing teams from the Power 5 conference, along with playing teams within your schedule, it kind of balances itself out. The question goes on to be, though, when you play these teams from these Power 5 conferences, will the level of strong competition still be in place? Because there have been times where when the SEC team plays an ACC team, the power structure, that tough competitive game sometimes isn't there. Or if you have a Big 12 team playing a Big 10 team, you don't see the competition, the toughness, that battle-tested mentality in the picture. So it's a good idea to stay with the 8-game schedule because you have your own schedule within your conference, plus playing a team from a Power 5 conference. But can that tough, competitive mindset continue to play out forward?
So what you're saying basically is if the SEC would go to 9 games, that schedule for most teams would be too tough from a physical standpoint.
Yeah, it would be too tough because, as I mentioned earlier in the show, Mark, you have a lot of these bigger guys. There are a lot of these bigger guys, these 6'6", 6'7" guys, these 300-plus pound guys that, yes, an offensive system in this day and age with the evolution of the spread, you get these leaner guys that are light on their feet, but you still have these big maulers up front that they don't have that same fast-paced mentality. They're going to end up with their hands on their hips on a lot of plays because they're winded. They're going to take some plays off because they're winded in a lot of these tough ball games. So, just as I mentioned, for the health aspect, you would keep it at 8 games, though you would want the competition of that 9th game. But with the organizations of college football adding in the rule that you play a team from the Power 5 conferences in your schedule, keeping it in 8 games, it balances out because you at least get to taste every part of the rainbow here playing a team from a Power 5 conference.
Okay, I could understand that if we were still playing an 11-game schedule, but we've got 12 games, so we've got 3 non-conference games, and I would love to see a formula schedule. That's what I would love to see. Instead of teams running around signing contracts with other schools and just running around and having hidden agendas to sign with specific schools and programs, make it a formula like the NFL, and your non-conference schedule is determined by a formula, and I've outlined that in other videos, so I'm not going to go through the whole details of how I would set that up, but that would balance out the schedule, and that would make sure that everybody in a non-conference sense would have a balanced schedule, at least based on last year's results. So I would think it would be both productive and it would protect the student athlete if, let's say, in Alabama each year played an extremely difficult non-conference game, whether that's Oklahoma or USC or whoever it is from a non-conference game perspective, and then the second game would be like a mid-tier team. You know, whether you're talking about Iowa, you're talking about Kansas State, you're talking about somebody in that realm, Oregon State, somebody like that, and then the third game would be somebody that you're talking about that may be a traditional game that you play against a team that needs a big payoff. So we know that South Carolina plays the Citadel, and they play Coastal Carolina, and they play Winthrop and schools like that, and that needs to continue to help out those schools. So my claim is to go with a 9-game schedule simply because the best formula for determining a conference champion is to play everybody. That would be the ideal. Like if there was a 16-game NFL schedule, then you would play everyone, and the 14 teams in the SEC would play the other 13, and you would have no debate over this team has an easier schedule, this team has a tougher schedule. Everybody plays everybody. Like the Big 12 right now, expansion by the other conferences has actually helped the competitive balance and the fairness in the Big 12 schedule because they only have 10 teams, so they play 9 conference games. So I find it ironic that the one major conference with only 10 teams plays a 9-game conference schedule, and they got it right. They play everybody, so nobody can say we've got a tougher schedule than they do. It's the same schedule for everyone. I just find it difficult that now in the ACC, the Big Ten, and the SEC, that you've got 14 teams and you've only got 8 games. Therefore, you're only playing 13. You've got 13 opponents in the conference. You're only playing 8. You're missing 5 teams. And again, my best example of the imbalance in the schedule and the lack of equity would be the Alabama versus LSU situation last season when LSU had to play Florida and Georgia, 2 teams that were combined 14-2 in the SEC the season before, and Alabama played a combined 2-14 teams from the other division in Kentucky and Tennessee. So you're talking about a huge disparity in level of competition there. And I think that could be balanced out even in an 8 or 9 game season in conference by taking, follow me here, Stephen M. You take Alabama, for example. Let's say they won the, we'll take Auburn, for example, because it's a reality. They won the SEC Western Division last year. They would play the first place team in the other division from the previous season. So they would play Missouri, and they would also play the last place team. And then they would play their designated rival because I don't want to tear up the Alabama-Tennessee series or Georgia-Auburn. So, and then you continue that down the line. So Alabama finishing second in the SEC West plays the second place team from the previous season and the second to last place team and their designated rival. And if one of those two match, then you just move it a spot. And I've played this out a few different ways, and it completely balances out the schedule, and there's no disparity in level of competition. You can never predict how good the teams are going to be that next season, but at least based on last year's results, you bring balance and equity to the conference schedule. And again, I would love to see 9 games for no other reason than it's closer than playing a 13-game season in conference, and that would be ideal. So anyway, just my thoughts on the SEC scheduling, and we invite people to join in and drop us your comments and your questions about the SEC scheduling, and I'm sure a lot of people have a lot of opinion out there talking about schedules. When you talk about rankings, you talk about top 5 lists or top 10 lists, and you talk about schedules, people always have an opinion. So please follow me on MarkRogersTV, follow me on Twitter, and we will definitely discuss and debate college football. All right, Stephen M., we've got a situation in the SEC where we've probably lost the best quarterback class in the history of the league. I would love for somebody else to possibly serve up a quarterback class from the past that would compare to this one. And I'm not talking about the projection of how they're going to do in the pros. I'm talking about their productivity and their accolades in college when you talk about Murray, McCarron, Manziel, Franklin on down the line. So that leaves us with a lot of inexperience at quarterback. I would love to start a series here as we play out through the summer and get close to 2014 Game 1, looking at each position in the SEC. And I know you've got a top 5 list for us at the quarterback position, so I would love to hear it.
Well, Mark, when you talk about SEC quarterbacks in the Southeastern Conference, we lost a great class that's going to the National Football League. You talk about A.J. McCarron, Aaron Murray, Zach Mettenberger, James Franklin, Jonathan Manziel, and Connor Shaw. They did a lot on the college football landscape, and especially in the SEC. But the quarterbacks returning, and in my top 5, Mark, I'm looking at Bo Wallace of Ole Miss, Nick Marshall of Auburn, Matty Mogg of Missouri, Dak Prescott of Mississippi State, and Dylan Thompson of South Carolina. This is why. Number 1, with Bo Wallace, he is the most experienced passer of the group coming back. He's been in Ole Miss and Oxford for 4 seasons. You talk about he's a big guy, dual threat guy, is accurate when he can be, has a lot of toughness in the pocket, has a big arm, can scan the field, and can put throws on the money. Now, he's going to be without Dante Moncrief, who's with the Indianapolis Colts now, but Evan Ingram and Laquan Treadwell do return. My one thing with Bo Wallace is, can he be consistent? There were times last season where Bo Wallace would force throws down the field. He would telegraph passes. He would try to have too much confidence in his arm and try to thread the needle too much. If he can just be consistent, use his arm strength, put the ball in right spots, use his progressions wisely to get the ball downfield to the receivers that are open, Bo Wallace is going to be a good leader in his senior season for Mississippi next season. Number 2, I look at Nick Marshall. Let's be honest. Auburn ran the ball down everyone's throats last year. They had the number 1 rush offense in the nation. They averaged, I want to say, 350 yards a game plus on the ground. And it was because of Gus Malzahn's option zone read option run system, where you would have Trey Mason run the ball, you would have Nick Marshall run the ball, you would have Corey Grant taking sweep passes to the outside running the football. So Auburn ran the ball a lot. But with Nick Marshall coming back next season as a senior, his first full off season, his first full camp with the team, with the coaching staff, another year to really process the offense, another year to process how do I make decisions as a quarterback in the pocket, because This is his season to not only take the reins more and be a leader from a quarterback standpoint, but from an offensive standpoint of you have NFL scouts watching you now. Can you really break down film, look at defenses, dissect down secondaries, know when secondaries are in zone against you, know when secondaries are in man coverage against you, know who's blitzing off the linebackers, who's blitzing on the defensive line. This is Nick Marshall's chance to really process what defenses are going to throw at him. I remember last season when Nick Marshall passed the ball less than 20 times, Auburn won games. There were 4 games in which Nick Marshall had 20 or more pass attempts. 3 of those games, or 2 or 3 of those games, Auburn lost. The one game that Auburn did win in that mentality of him passing for 20 plus was the game against Texas A&M in Cal Field against Johnny Manziel. But I feel like Nick Marshall, he does show the potential of being able to pass the ball effectively and efficiently. The question is, can he keep it going? Can he continue to process? And can he develop a quicker release of football? Number 3, I got to go with Matty Mark, Mizzou. Matty Mark did a phenomenal job last year. You don't expect too many freshmen to jump out of the gate and to be thrown into the fire, especially after James Franklin went down. But Matty Mark, like a soldier going into battle, Matty Mark puts on that helmet, he locks down that chin strap, he goes in, and he produced for Gary Pinkel in that Missouri Tiger team. He had 13 touchdowns last season to 1, maybe 2 interceptions, had a great season, put the ball in the right spots, really fed the ball to Marcus Lucas, Dorial Green-Beckham, and Landamian Washington. I feel like with his first full season now as the man at Missouri, it's going to be a little difficult to start because Landamian Washington, Marcus Lucas, and Dorial Green-Beckham are all gone. You're going to have to find a different go-to receiver. Mizzou is also without Henry Josie, who's now in the NFL. But they return Hansbrough, and they return another Marcus Murphy, another talented running back. But for Matty Mark, it's going to be the question of, can he keep it going, be consistent, read his checkdowns, really become a leader in that huddle, and be able to take that team from point A to point B? Because he does have the arm strength. Number 4, Mark, is Dak Prescott. How about the Cowbells of Mississippi State? That fan base down there in Starkville, they have something to cheer about now because Dak Prescott's a warrior. When you looked at last season, between him and Tyler Russell, Russell was looked at as the better passer, but when you talk about that vocal leader, that aura, that presence, and a young man that ran 80% of that Mississippi State offense, it was Dak Prescott. He could beat you on the ground with his legs. He could beat you with his arm. The question is with Dak Prescott, can he develop a little bit more with his arm? He has Duranian Wilson and Jamian Lewis, 2 talented receivers coming back. So if Dak Prescott can work with the timing routes, the deep ball routes, the post routes, the back shoulder throws, just getting the full acquisition of getting his arm talent out there, because he has the leadership, he has the short to intermediate routes down. It's just the timing routes that Dak Prescott will need to work on. And my number 5 guy, Mark, Dylan Thomas, South Carolina. This is a Steve Spurrier quarterback, because Dylan Thomas is that drop back pocket passer that is going to air the football. Connor Shaw was the scrappy leader who could get the job done with his arm as well as his legs, but Dylan Thomas is that prototypical Steve Spurrier passer that's going to air the ball out, that's going to get the ball on a dime to every receiver on that South Carolina roster. Can he continue to grow, be a leader in that huddle, be able to process the playbook and what Spurrier is trying to coach him to do? He can do that. South Carolina is going to have a good offense in 2014. Defense they'll need to work on because they're without Jadeveon Clowney. But offensively, South Carolina would be okay if Dylan Thomas can continue to learn under Coach Spurrier. But my 5 guys, as I mentioned, Mark, Bo Wallace, Nick Marshall, Matty Mock, Dak Prescott, and Dylan Thomas.
And again, for South Carolina, it's not just Jadeveon Clowney. It's Kelsey Quarles and Chaz Sutton and Victor Hampton, and missing a lot from last season's great defense.
That is a plethora of guys, Mark.
That's right. They're losing a lot, and we've talked about and addressed their secondary needs in particular on the show a number of times and in other video posts. South Carolina going to be looking to a lot of young defensive backs that are coming in to make up for Legree and Hampton leaving. I'll just add some notes here. If anybody would like to see my top 5, I've got a video post, so you can run down the top 5 right there with me and Dr. SEC and also Chad Niepling of SEC Sports Insider. And again, Chad's right here every week with us at 1 o'clock Eastern and couldn't make it this week. So my thoughts on some of the guys that you ran down here, Stephen M. We got Nick Marshall. I love that you went through the attributes of each quarterback, because sometimes you can break down a top 5 or a top 10 list a number of ways. If you're looking at who you think are going to be the best players or who do you think is going to be most productive. So those are two different things sometimes. Is that player surrounded by great players around them, offensive linemen, running back, wide receivers to make plays? So is the supporting cast going to lift them to a higher level maybe than their abilities? What is the play calling? Do they have exceptional quarterback and offensive coordinator in place? Or are we just strictly looking at the quarterbacks and saying, regardless of offensive line, this person may not produce at the level that I think that they should because they don't have the supporting cast, but I think this person's the third best quarterback in the SEC, for example, but they're not going to play like the third best quarterback because they don't have the supporting cast or the coaches in place to make it happen. So those are two different arguments. I'm going strictly by who I think are the best quarterbacks regardless of supporting cast. Nick Marshall, it's going to be interesting. As you mentioned, they ran the ball down everybody's throats, including Missouri, including Florida State even. Trey Mason with 200 yards against the Seminoles, and including Alabama. Nobody could stop him on the ground. Teams have an entire season to prep for Auburn's rush offense. Trey Mason's not there. They do have a host of talented running backs led by Cameron Artis-Payne coming in. I don't know that Nick Marshall is going to be given that opportunity to show that he can read defenses. It's going to be interesting. I appreciate very much your point in that, is he going to be given the keys to the car? We're almost certain that the rushing attack can't get any better. It's probably going to take a step back, so he's going to have to throw in crucial situations. Much like an RG3, even on the NFL level, they say that he's given one read. He looks and he's got to read, or he takes off and run, and they may continue that process with Nick Marshall and not necessarily let him dive too much into second and third and fourth reads. We shall see. Nick Marshall, you mentioned that when they passed more, they were susceptible to losing those games, the LSU game and, of course, the national championship game. My counterpoint to that would be, of course, that they were down big to LSU and had to throw it. They were in a competitive game with Florida State, had to throw it on occasion. And in some of those games, they walked over teams like Tennessee by 30 points, and they were able, obviously, to keep it close to the vest and just run the football. So big season for Nick Marshall, 14 touchdowns, 6 picks last season. You bring up Dylan Thompson, made some great points on Dylan Thompson. This guy, in place of Connor Shaw, we've seen him play in the clutch and play well in the past. 2 seasons ago against Clemson, he was forced into action the last game of the season against a very capable Clemson team that beat LSU in the Chick-fil-A Bowl, and he ripped them up for 300 yards and 3 touchdowns and put like 35 points on the board. Then 4 weeks later, they played a very good Michigan team. They were on the ropes. They were about to lose. Threw the game-winning touchdown pass with 7 seconds left. So Dylan Thompson's done it before. The thing that he may not be able to do that Connor Shaw could, besides running the football, I'm just talking about strictly as a passer, is he's got to watch himself. Connor Shaw last year, 24 touchdowns, 1 pick. That's still an amazing stat to me. Dylan Thompson, 4 touchdowns, 3 picks. He loves his arm. He loves to throw it into tight windows. He's got to watch it and take care of the football. Bo Wallace, great points on Bo Wallace. It's all right there for him. It was kind of curious to me at times last year to see Barry Brunetti get the call, and all of a sudden Wallace is out of the game and Brunetti's in there. He doesn't have to be concerned with Brunetti looking over his shoulder. So I would love to see Bo Wallace really explode, and he's a classic dual-threat quarterback there at Ole Miss. Dak Prescott, same thing, similar quarterback in a number of respects. Unfortunately, he got nicked up with injuries. Russell had to play. Damian Williams, the true freshman, had to play last season. But we saw Prescott really show his stuff late in the season, scored the game winner against Ole Miss, and then had the huge game against Rice in the Liberty Bowl with 5 touchdowns. Matty Mock, you laid it out there well with Stephen M. with Matty Mock. Yeah, as a true freshman, very, very impressive. Going to have to be a more accurate passer this season. I'm concerned with the lack of outside, I don't want to say playmaking ability, proven playmaking ability with the loss of LaDainian Washington and Dorial Green-Beckham, most likely. That Matty Mock will have less weapons, of course, than he had last season. But credit this kid. James Franklin went down in a heated game in the 4th quarter against Georgia on the road. He steps in, makes a couple crucial throws, leads them to a huge win that sent them on their run to win the SEC Eastern Division. Matty Mock, as you mentioned, 13 touchdowns, I believe only 2 interceptions last season. But again, 51% completion percentage. He's got to be more efficient in the passing game. And I think Georgia fans want us to mention Hudson Mason, who filled in admirably for Aaron Murray down the stretch last season and had a big bowl game against Nebraska with 300 yards and played well against Georgia Tech, a game that Georgia was down like 17-0, and they battled back with Mason at quarterback. So we'll be interested to see if he takes those progressional steps up the ladder. So that's Stephen M's top 5. Again, I've got a video out with my top 5 along with Dr. SEC and also Chad Napling of SEC Sports Insider, our top 5 at each position in the SEC. And we'll take another position next week and look at that position and run down our top 5. All right, Stephen M., I'd like to talk some Kentucky football here because if you want a spring update, a post-spring update on a lot of these schools, really everybody in the SEC, check out our previous shows because we ran through everybody in the SEC. Then we got a bit locked down into the NFL draft and need to catch up on the Kentucky Wildcats. So, Stephen M., as I see things, it's amazing what Mark Stoops has done with the last 2 recruiting classes. He got the job late in the process, just a couple months before signing day 2 years ago, pulled in like a 25th ranked class, somewhere in that range, top 25, top 30. Then this last season made a big splash into the top 20. The previous 10 football recruiting classes at Kentucky between 2002 and 2012 ranked an average of 58th in the country, and now he's brought in 2 classes in the top 25. I still think that this roster is extremely thin by SEC standards. I think that they're going to be able to rush the passer. They've got guys like Zadarius Smith, 59 stops last year, 6 sacks. Bud Dupree's an emerging star. He had 7 sacks last season. Jason Hatcher, they say that he's got all the talent in the world off the edge. They're so loaded with defensive ends on this team and guys that can run after the passer or drop in coverage that they're really looking just to get their best players on the field, not from a schematic standpoint, looking to go to a 3-4 a lot of the time or bring a 5th defensive back onto the field because they feel that strongly about their secondary talent and the talent that they've got, again, at defensive end or outside linebacker. The defensive backfield strong. Blake McLean had 59 tackles last year. Eric Dixon's a veteran with 55 stops, and Ashley Lowry as well with 46. Will this team be able to stop the run? They've lost all sorts of players along the defensive front inside in the interior. So that's going to be difficult. And, of course, their leader on defense, Avery Williamson, off to the NFL. He was tough. He was reliable. He got his teammates in place. He was the leader on the defense. He's going to be sorely missed. Of course, on offense, it starts with quarterback, and Jalen Whitlow's gone. So this is a very deep quarterbacking roster depth chart for Kentucky, but it's very, very inexperienced. Right now, it seems to be a two-way battle between Patrick Towles, pocket passer, and then the stud that all Kentucky fans want to see out there, true freshman Drew Barker, who brings the entire skill set. But I would expect him to be the number 2 guy going into August camp and possibly the opener against Tennessee Martin. Max Smith played admirably last season, 9 touchdowns and 1 pick, very efficient in relief of Jalen Whitlow. Max Smith has had some injury issues, but again, 9 touchdowns, 1 pick, 57%. Max Smith should get his shot as well as Towles and the freshman, again, the Kentucky savior, Drew Barker. Javis Blue coming back at wide receiver, the leading receiver at 43 catches, leads a group of 5 that were very productive last season with 117 catches between them. They've got a couple true freshmen that they're counting on as taking Kentucky passing game to a next level in T.V. Williams. Love the name. Thaddeus Snodgrass. Again, these true freshmen who have an extra gear that the players that they have on the veterans roster don't have. Second-year offensive coordinator Neil Brown loves to run an up-tempo, pass-happy style offense, so he's looking for playmakers. So expect to see T.V. Williams and also Thaddeus Snodgrass, despite their true freshman status, on the field for this team. Probably their best position, in addition to defensive end and in the secondary, best position on offense is definitely at running back. JoJo Kemp's a playmaker with 500 yards. They've got a Nebraska transfer in Braylon Hurd, who we understand was just barely beat out by Amir Abdullah, who's one of the best backs in the nation at Nebraska. And Braylon Hurd's supposed to be the most talented running back that they've got on this roster. They've got a transfer from Pitt in Demetrius Davis, and then they brought in 2 4-star running backs in Mikael Horton and Stanley Williams. So this team is SEC deep at defensive end, secondary, and running back. The offensive line is still a mess. They're going to have to figure that out. I think that's the biggest weakness on the field, and that's where you can't be weak in this league especially. So that's my take on Kentucky right now, Stephen M. Coming off the 2-10, do you have any hope for the Wildcat faithful?
I have hope for the Wildcat faithful, but just like with Arkansas and Brett Bielema, it's going to take some time with Kentucky in the Bluegrass State. You talk about Mark Stoops has done a great job. In 2 seasons, you get 2 top 20, top 25 recruiting classes. That's a start. You have talent, as you mentioned, Jabez Blue at wide receiver. I watched Alabama go to Lexington, the city of the wild horses, to take on Kentucky. And when I saw Jabez Blue catch a 60-yard touchdown pass, I was like, man, this guy has speed. He's got a 5th gear to him. It's like driving a stick shift down the highway. Jabez Blue has some wheels. He can fly. Now, Jalen Whitlow, it hurts. It's a blow, a light blow to see him leave because he was the versatile quarterback for Kentucky. He was the dual-threat guy, but Max Smith did play well, as you mentioned, Mark, 9 touchdowns, 1 interception. I would look for him to have that hunger to win the job, but as you mentioned, with Barker being the highly touted freshman quarterback, it's going to be an interesting battle in summer camp and in fall practice to see, which one between Smith and Barker would win the complete starting job under head coach Mark Stoops. JoJo Kemp is a talented running back. He's built low, good speed, great vision, has the size, has the cutback ability. I feel like Kentucky has hope in the future. I want to say they will definitely win more than 2 games next season. I see the Wildcats at least getting 4 to 5 games. They'll get 4 to 5 wins in that schedule. They will still be out of a bowl game picture. They're working towards that, but I think that by next year, Kentucky will have at least a shot at a bowl game. I feel like this season they'll get 4 to 5 wins. The ceiling is getting higher, it's climbing, but as of right now, they're still building the house, Mark. They're still putting the cement blocks down right now. So in next year and the years to come, I see Kentucky getting to a bowl game, but next year, 4 to 5 wins.
That's right. They're not putting the roof on this house. They're not painting the walls. They're putting the blocks down. They're building the foundation right now. So that's what it is right now. And as you well know, Stephen M., because of Mark Stoops' exceptional work on the recruiting trail, again, 2 top 25 classes in the last 2 years, they've awarded him with a contract extension through 2018. So that's primary to any program, to build that stability, for that head coach to be able to walk in recruits' living rooms, talk to the mom, talk to the dad, and be able to say, hey, I'm going to be here. I'm going to be here throughout your son's career here at Kentucky to watch over him and guide his career both in and outside the classroom. So that's huge for Kentucky, that they made the commitment to Stoops, and they didn't do it based on results on the field. It's results on the recruiting trail, and we'll see how that turns out. This team coming off a 2-10 season, and let's keep in mind those 2 wins were against Miami of Ohio and Alabama State. So this team has a long climb to make. They showed glimpses. They gave South Carolina a scare, in particular, that being their most notable effort of the season, taking the Gamecocks down to the end 35-28. Stephen M., let's march through the schedule, because you're looking at – sorry?
They also gave Teddy Bridgewater and Louisville a scare.
Yeah, they were within a couple touchdowns. Yeah, they did. That was like a 27-14 game, something like that, and I think they were within 1 score in the fourth quarter. So, yeah, they were right there, and definitely that's a landmark game for them, and that's something Kentucky wants to be able to wrestle back from Louisville. And now that the Cardinals are in the ACC, that's a nice little SEC-ACC matchup to add to Georgia Tech, and Florida State, and Clemson, South Carolina. So the ACC and the SEC with a nice little series there late season, and that actually winds things up for Kentucky this season. So let's look at this schedule real quick here, Stephen M. So you're talking about 4 or 5 wins, and I think it's doable. I can't really find them here. If they do come up with the 4 or 5 wins, it's definitely going to be because the non-conference schedule is very light, very light. We know they've got to play Louisville, but besides that, they open up with Tennessee Martin and Ohio University. Got to win those 2 games. Got to win those 2 games, and this is a team that lost to Western Kentucky last year, so they're not gimmies by any stretch. Then they dive into, Stephen M., at Florida, Vanderbilt, South Carolina the next 3 weeks. They're going to be a significant underdog in all 3 of those games, but probably have a shot at Florida, especially if the Gators can't get the offense going. Then we got Louisiana Monroe, so that ball game's in Lexington, so that's very winnable. So hey, maybe they go 3-3 out of the gate if they can win all those non-conference games. Then they've got a rough stretch at LSU, Mississippi State, at Missouri, and Georgia. So that's pretty rugged right there. I don't expect them to win any of those games. They got Mississippi State at home, but no, Mississippi State's a much better football team. Will have a shot at Tennessee, you would think, although I think the Vols are coming. Butch Jones is doing some business there, and I think that roster is much better than it was 2 years ago. So I think Tennessee's decidedly better than Kentucky. So I do not expect them to win that game, nor winning at Louisville, although, as you mentioned, hey, it's an SEC roster in spots against Louisville without Teddy Bridgewater, without Calvin Pryor, and some other players that we saw on this last Louisville team that went 11-1. So I'm going to throw out 4 wins for this football team. I think they squeak out 1 in the SEC, and they win 3 other games against those 3 lightweights, Tennessee Martin, Ohio, and Louisiana Monroe. And otherwise, I think it's a rough go. And as I always like to check out, Stephen M., when I'm looking at SEC schedules, who do you play on the other side? Because I know you play your division. So it's LSU and it's Mississippi State. So it's really difficult in terms of the 2 out-of-division games that they got there. They always play Mississippi State. That's the cross rivalry in the other division. And then this season, unfortunately, they've got to go to Baton Rouge and take on LSU. Couldn't have found Arkansas on their schedule, unfortunately, this year. So it shakes out that way for Kentucky. Any thoughts on this Kentucky schedule for 2014?
I'm just looking at this LSU game, Mark, and going, oh, mama. They go down to Death Valley, Tiger Stadium, Baton Rouge, in front of Mike the Tiger and the ominous moon, and those fans and Les Miles and that hat. Oh, man. Is that a night game by chance?
You know, I don't know. I don't have it listed here. That's got like SEC Network at noon, I think, written all over it. I don't know why anyone would move that to a night game, but that's just a guess off the top of my head. So, yeah, that could be difficult. But if the Wildcats go into that game at 3-3, hey, they lose that game by 4 or 5 touchdowns. Hey, they're still 3-4, and they're still probably feeling pretty good about themselves based on the last 2 years.
Well, they would have to be, especially if they go into that matchup against LSU at 3-3. Like we both mentioned here, Mark, we both see 4, possibly 5, but definitely 4 wins for this Kentucky ball club. And as I mentioned, they're still putting down the foundation of how they want the system to be. Mark Stoops is still trying to find, what's the identity of the Kentucky Wildcats. Are we a run team? Are we a pass team? Are we an up-tempo team? They're still trying to find, who are we here in Kentucky? Because the state's been known as a basketball school under Coach John Calipari and the Kentucky Wildcats there. But from the football aspect, the Wildcats are trying to find what's our identity in the SEC, because we're tired of being the floor mats. But we got to continue building this foundation so that we can become better than just the floor mats. So Kentucky's got to find what its niche is in the SEC.
Stephen M., I think the basement is 2-10. I think they give us another 2-10 possibly. If they win the first 2 against Tennessee, Martin, and OU, I think they could lose the rest of them. I think it's possible because although they've recruited extremely well, the roster's still very thin. They're still shaky in spots. I think even Louisiana Monroe could give them a fight, and they could definitely lose every game in the SEC. That's the basement. I think the ceiling is 4-8. I think they steal one against Tennessee possibly, and then they run the table against their 3 non-conference opponents outside of Louisville. I can't see them stealing 2 games in the SEC. I think it's 1, maybe Tennessee. Most likely Tennessee would be the 1. Yeah, most likely Tennessee would be the 1. I can't see them stealing a game against anybody else. I guess the next best shot would be Vandy possibly, or at Florida.
I could see Vandy maybe. Vandy without James Franklin, though they brought in Derek Mason. Vandy also without Jordan Matthews. So I could possibly see Vandy. And then how great would the Tennessee-Kentucky matchup be? You got Mark Stoops and Butch Jones, 2 of your newer, well not newer, but still young coaches in the face of the SEC, battling it out there with 2 young football teams. So I would definitely love to see the Kentucky-Tennessee matchup.
And if they steal 2 of those SEC games, how great would the Louisville game be? Or actually, if they can only steal 1 SEC game, how great would the Louisville game be if they could go into it with a shot at getting to a bowl game? That would be nice to see.
It's going to be raucous in Lexington. You're talking about horses for days in Lexington.
All right, Stephen M. Smith, we're talking some Kentucky football here on SEC in 60. If you've stumbled upon us for the very first time, here's the deal. We talk SEC football for 60 solid minutes, and if you checked out our NFL draft shows, we're talking about like an hour and a half of SEC football. So check out the previous shows because we covered everybody in depth during spring football, and we really annihilated the NFL draft, both pre and post NFL draft, regarding the 72 SEC eligible players to go into the NFL draft that we analyzed. Stephen M. Smith often joins us, and you can find him at touchdownalabama.net. You can also find him on a number of platforms, currently working and just released a post on Roy Kramer and the SEC's breakthrough and landmark decision to go to an SEC championship game and how that completely changed the landscape of college football, both on the field and financially and logistically with conference expansion, and it has just completely changed the landscape of college football and really set up the SEC to distinguish itself as the best conference in college football. So again, we're here every Monday at 1 o'clock Eastern, noon Central. I'm Mark Rogers of MarkRogersTV. Please follow me on Twitter, and we will talk some college football. I follow it every day. That's all I do, 24/7, 365, is follow college football, and Stephen M. Smith as well at ESPN_future. Follow him on Twitter, and you will get some great insight into Alabama athletics and also the entire SEC and beyond with Stephen M. Smith. Check out our posts. We've got some videos on YouTube and at MarkRogersTV.com with the top 5 at every position in the SEC and also the top 10. We're currently running a series, top 10 each position in college football nationwide, and running an excellent series, and would love to have Stephen M. Share a video post on this one, talking to different bloggers across the country. 3 most excruciating losses as a college football fan, 3 most exhilarating wins. So Stephen M., going to have you on to talk about Alabama's best wins and worst losses since you've been following Alabama football.
That is going to be the one I will have the whiteboard out for.
All right, get the whiteboard out, the big board.
We're going to have the big board out here because we got some great wins and some controversial losses, Mark. We got some controversy where these losses are concerned.
And the deal is if you're losing 6 or 7 games a year, they don't sting. But when you're Alabama and you're expected to win them all, they sting. When you lose, they sting, and it hurts, and it stays in your craw for a long, long time.
It really does. And, I mean, there have been some games from Saban's early years to now that we've won. I've been excited. We've lost, and I've been like, oh, my goodness, what in the world is going on? But I will have the big board prepared for that segment because it's going to be a good one.
Yeah, I think I can automatically find some names in the corners of my mind here, like Tim Tebow, Urban Meyer, Chris Davis, Johnny Manziel.
Just stop it. Stop.
All right, for Stephen M. Smith of Touchdown Alabama, please find him there, touchdownalabama.net, and on Twitter at ESPN_future. I'm Mark Rogers. This has been the SEC in 60. Please join us next week talking SEC football wall-to-wall for 60-plus minutes. And you have a blessed week, and we will see you next time.